I don't care how hardcore the criminals or gang members or people in the neighborhoods, because oftentimes I knew them. Some of them were related to me. So I never really, and even as my career at LAPD, most of my career was spent in South LA, so that was always where I felt comfortable, so I didn't fear the community as much as I feared, what would my next encounter with LAPD or the Sheriff's Department or Beverly Hills PD or one of those agencies was going to look like.
Hey, Black and Blue fam, welcome to the latest edition of the Black and Blue podcast. My name is Dale, and I'm the host, like it says right there on the screen there. Hey, thank you for joining me for this show, because this is a very special edition of the Black and Blue podcast. This is the street life version of the show, if I can get that up. This is the street life version of the Black and Blue podcast, where I bring the Black and Blue podcast out of the studio and into the streets. Today, I am at the police facility of one of the most storied and beautiful institutions of higher learning in our country. Hey, but before I get to that, hey, make sure you like, share, and subscribe this show on any one of my platforms. You can find me everywhere at Black and Blue US. All right, so like I said, I'm at one of our country's most storied universities. I'm talking about the University of California at Los Angeles. You know it better as UCLA. And I'm here sitting here at their police facility with their chief. So everybody, Black and Blue fam, help me welcome to the show, Chief John Thomas. How you doing, sir?
It is a pleasure to be here, Dale. I've been a fan of Black and Blue podcast for a while, and it's an honor to be included to help tell a story. Not my story, but a story.
A story, absolutely, absolutely. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm doing very well.
All
and
right.
It's a blessing to be here. UCLA, I went here as an undergrad, and to be able to come back and serve first as the interim, and after a national search, they decided they'd stick with me. So I'm probably the first to hear it, but
all right, congratulations.
It'll be public knowledge soon, but I'm grateful to be here, grateful to serve, and this is entering my 40th year of service, and the moment it stops being fun, the moment I feel like I can't contribute, the moment I feel like it's time to move on, I'll do exactly that. But right now, I'm here as the chief of UCLA Police Department.
All right,
Pleased
absolutely.
to be here.
Love it, love it. Fun fact, I started my law enforcement career right here at UCLA.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Outstanding.
Way back in 2000. Well, actually, it was my second agency. I started at the Border Patrol in the 90s, and then I came here for only a year. And so that was way back in 2000, 24 years ago.
Well, welcome. I always tell people that served here, this is home. If you put some time in here and contributed to our legacy and the foundation, this is your home too. So welcome.
Yeah,
welcome back.
brings back some memories. Things look a little different, but
yeah,
this is a great campus, and we'll talk about all that here. So you've been here since how long now?
I've been here exactly a year, December 27th. So I'm a year and some months.
Okay,
So,
all right.
And it looks like I'll be here for
Yes,
more years.
Yes, indeed. And where'd you come from before that?
Gosh, I started my career at LAPD. I started my career in 1984, Los Angeles Police Department. I left there in 2006, retired at the level of lieutenant, and was about to make captain. I made a decision that I wanted to seek some difficult and more challenging type of police work, and I certainly found it in campus policing. After LAPD, my first campus policing position, I was the deputy chief of police at the University District of Columbia, where I got a chance to work with one of probably the premier mentor for so many black campus chiefs, Robbie Robinson, who passed away a few years ago. But if you ask many of the black campus chiefs, at some point or another, Robbie mentored us. He was kind of the godfather of campus policing for so many of us, and that's where I started off. Someone told me, when I decided to go into campus policing, if you ever get a chance to work for Robbie Robinson, take the chance. And he had a position opened at the University District of Columbia where he was the chief, and he brought me in as deputy chief, and I spent a year there, and it was an amazing year. And then after that, my mom became sick, and I had to come back to California. USC had a captain's position opened up. I applied for that, got that, promoted to assistant chief, and then chief of police, chief of the Department of Public Safety. USC is private, so they don't have a police department. It's a public safety department. And spent 16 years there. In the last 9, I was the chief of the Department of Public Safety at USC. I tried to retire. I retired and probably spent a year doing consulting, and actually USC kept me on as a special advisor to the senior vice president of administration. And then I get contacted by UCLA to see if I would be interested in being the interim chief for a year, because their chief just retired, Tony Lee. Went through that process and spent a year as an interim. Didn't expect to fall in love with it. Didn't feel like there were any more challenges in front of me to seek and get here, and all of that. I loved it, and some very good, unique challenges. So as I enter my 40th year, LAPD, University District of Columbia, USC, and now here.
All right. Talk about some of the differences between LAPD and campus police.
Yeah, I'll say not just LAPD, but I would say the difference between municipal and campus policing in general. And having been a part of both, a major city department like LAPD, which I did it all. I did, the undercover narcotic stuff. I did gangs. I did all the assignments that I wanted to do. I got to be the adjutant to 2 chiefs of police, Bernard Parks and Bill Bratton. So I knew LAPD intimately well. And one of the things I didn't do when I did retire, I stayed on with LAPD as a reserve. So there was really no disconnection between my LAPD career, other than the fact that I was working for free at that point as a reserve. And,
right.
People will question my sanity
Yes,
for that,
exactly.
but at the same
Free,
time, free. So, so I knew LAPD intimately well. And I will say this, I have found for me that the transition, many don't make the transition successfully from municipal to campus policing. Many officers and folks that have held command positions in municipal agencies get over to campuses and find that it's much more difficult. And not so much of the police, the enforcement stuff, but just the transition to, you're beholden to so many people, You cannot, I say this in all candor, you can't fake community policing on a university campus. You have to be about building relationships, because one, you have a very transitory population. You get students in every year, every semester, every quarter, and they're constantly coming in and out. There's a big transition at the beginning of the year, they come in, and at the end of the year, there's commencement. So you're constantly building relationships, because that's your primary stakeholder group. So in that piece alone, that's very unique and very different from municipal. Municipal policing, you get assigned to an area, you're responsible for that. You get to know kind of the flow, the ins and outs, and you can get locked into a routine of one size fits all. I know this community. I know what works here. University, particularly a big Division I university like USC and UCLA, it's a global institution. You have students from all over the world. You have students from across the country. Even the students that look like you, their backgrounds may not be like yours. I grew up in South LA, and I had the assumption early on, yeah, surely they understand, that. And I came to realize they didn't. So you're constantly not only educating, but you're learning. At the same time, you still got to be about ensuring the safety of that environment. And one thing that's another unique challenge to this demographic and this stakeholder group, they're between the ages of 18 and roughly 22, 23. That age group, they don't think bad things can happen to them, as being a father.
I got 2 in college, I know.
They don't. They don't want to lock doors. They don't want to secure their property. They look around and they see that everybody has pretty much what they have. Everybody has an iPhone. Until you explain to them, not everybody has an iPhone, and that there's people that will come specifically into this environment to become predators and take those things because it's an easy environment to prey on. So there's a lot of different dynamics that make campus policing a lot more challenging. And I think the biggest nuance is you've got to evolve. You've got to evolve with what's relevant today may not be relevant tomorrow. What is a hot topic in a municipality, for instance, what's happening in the Middle East, it may not be a big deal in your particular city or where you live and where you work as an officer. But it is on these major university campuses, the protests and building those relationships and ensuring the safety and wellness of everyone. So for those reasons alone, I look at, and I often tell my municipal counterparts, when they look at and hear some of the things that we have to deal with, they understand. But I do, me personally, think it's far more challenging in this environment, having been at LAPD. And also being in contact still with command officers and the past few chiefs.
Yeah. I had a real interesting experience here too. Those fond memories. You brought up, protest. I mean, just in the year I was here, we had protests on campus. There was I guess, prime minister or president or something from Iran that came in, and they had the Secret Service and DSS up on roofs, and it was snipers, and he was giving a speech, and they were throwing tomatoes at him, and we had riot gear, and LAPD and the CHP was out here helping us out. It was, that was just here on UCLA. So,
No, a whole nother story is when President Obama came to USC back in 2010, and we had to secure him being there, and the university decided we want to have business as usual. We want to still have classes. And you can only imagine how that sit with the Secret Service and everybody else, but at the same time, we pulled it off. But those are things that are uniquely, you understand it because you've experienced it, but there's a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of pieces to it that you may be able to get away with shutting down certain things in a city because the president's there. And yes, you're going to do that if they tell you that, but there's always some nuances that are different on a college campus than they are in a city.
Yeah. And this campus is large, just like a city within itself, right? This and USC, right?
Oh yeah. Well, and not only that, just like USC, they're expanding. I've been here a year, and UCLA has, expanded and bought some significant properties. Palos Verdes, there's a campus now in Palos Verdes. They just bought, acquired the Westside Pavilion. And the other piece is downtown. They just purchased a facility. So the dynamics of everything being in one place is actually becoming antiquated because there's so many different pieces to a university. There's a research piece, and then there's also now a greater demand for universities to diversify and have online classes and be remote and have places and have facilities in places that they traditionally didn't. USC has a facility in Washington, D.C. now. So universities are no longer stagnant, and as a chief, you're still responsible for ensuring security and safety at all of those places.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I went to the University of Redlands for my master's, and we were back east a couple summers ago, and I saw University of Redlands campus out there. I was
Oh
like,
yeah.
yeah,
Oh yeah. Well,
yeah.
there's an Arizona State campus here in Los Angeles,
Yeah.
downtown. So, those common walls that used to exist, and you say, well, I know where UCLA is, and I know where USC is. Well, you better pull out a map, and you better it better be
Right.
if you're talking about where they have facilities. It's all over the place.
Yeah. So what's you guys' responsibility for those, at least here in this metropolitan area?
Well, first and foremost, it's not practical for us to have officers in all those places, but we do have to have liaison, and we do have to ensure that whatever the contract of security is that is in place here, that we have a direct communication with, and that they're well versed on what are the requirements that we have as far as reporting crimes and the annual security report and things like that. The other thing is, a chief, you're responsible for students studying abroad, and people don't realize that. Wherever there are students studying abroad, you have somewhat a responsibility, and you have to get that data from wherever those students are studying, anywhere in the world.
Wow.
So it's changing, and I came into the profession in 2006, campus policing, and just a reporting responsibility and the classifications and Title IX, all those things that are now in place that weren't as prevalent then. They currently are.
Yeah. Talk about the job of a UC police officer. It is a fully sworn.
Yeah, we're fully sworn police department. California Post trained and everything that a municipal officer. But our focus is primarily the UCLA, and not just the campus. It's pretty much the majority of where a lot of our officers patrol is around outlying residence halls that are out, a mile and a half, 2 miles away. So our responsibility is not only to safeguard the main campus, but also those other places where students live in the close proximity to the university. And of course, obviously, preparing for, whatever the incidents are involving safety and security, not just from an enforcement standpoint, but from planning large-scale events, demonstrations, controversial, quote-unquote, controversial speakers that come to campus. You name it. So our job is pretty much, for the most part, whatever a municipality does for their city and within their jurisdiction, same thing for us.
Yeah.
And being a full-fledged police department, we have investigations, we file our own reports, all of those things. So pretty much the same, I think, just because we're attached to, but really, when you think of the University of California, we're more in alignment to the state when it comes to, as opposed to a campus that's not a part of a statewide system.
Exactly. So. Yeah, I remember when I worked here, you bring up the state part. We are in the city of LA right now, and things may have changed since, just 24 years ago, but, they would say, yeah, you can go out in LA and do whatever you want to do as a police officer, but your responsibility is here on campus.
Here on campus.
Yeah, make sure things, when something jumps off here on campus, you're here.
You have to be here as your first priority.
Yep.
And that gets a little blurred. I saw it probably more so at USC. USC, even though USC is not a police department, patrolling around the neighborhood around USC. So their jurisdiction, based upon the memorandum of understanding with LAPD, allowed for them to patrol in and around the university. And that's good, and that can be some negatives to that. The good is that they become very familiar, and students that live in the community, there's a sense of safety and security based upon, the relationship that they have with those officers and the university. But where it gets a little confusing is the community also benefits, and they tend to call. They tend to call USC Department of Public Safety because they felt like, one, they're not as busy as LAPD Southwest. They will get there quicker. And two, over time, those relationships build with the community as well. In LAPD, it works because LAPD, there's a relationship there, and it actually is a force multiplier for them.
Yeah,
So.
yep. So, you started your career with LAPD, and then a couple of the jurisdictions you worked in, like I said, UCLA is in LA, so is USC. What was that kind of relationship with you and them?
It's interesting because probably because I went here as an undergrad, I always had good communications with all of the chiefs. From 2006, all of the chiefs that were here at UCLA, they knew me. We talked regularly. One of the things I put in place when I became chief at USC was for the USC UCLA football game, where we would partner up, and I would send officers to the games. I would send officers to the Rose Bowl when the game was there, and vice versa. They would send officers because, again, the one other dynamic when it comes to campus versus municipal policing, when it comes to students would much rather deal with municipal police than the campus police.
Yep.
Campus police, they know that impacts a lot more. If you give them a citation from LAPD, they'll take that all day long because mom and dad may not find out about it, and that may not impact their academic standing with the university. When it's a campus police officer, all of that is true, but also there's another pipeline where it goes to student judicial, and that they can be held more accountable that way as well.
Yeah.
So it's always been a good, positive relationship. Before I started here, I knew some of the officers here. I knew some of the command staff folks here. I knew the chief. So it was, when it comes to safety, the rivalry piece is important, but all that stuff goes out the window. When they had their incident here some years ago, I remember calling the chief and saying, "Hey, do you need anything?" When we had our incidents over at USC, "Hey, JT, is there anything you need over there at USC?" That doesn't mean that we didn't respect the rivalry, because if anybody will tell you at USC, I've always been a Bruin. Even though I worked at USC, they will tell you JT is a Bruin. I've never.
Yeah, I'm surprised they let you in the door over there.
I caught a lot of flack, at times. Good natured, obviously, but they knew. And so when I got over here, nobody was really surprised at USC. Yeah. They really were.
You're home.
I was home. Yeah.
You're home. Yeah. So going back out when you started your career, what was you said you grew up in South LA?
South LA.
What kind of drove you towards law enforcement to begin with?
Yeah, it's an interesting path, because I tell people, I've told this story so many times. I never had a great relationship with the police until I became one. Seriously, growing up in South LA, it was just common, and you just accepted certain things. You accepted the fact that, at any time you could get stopped, and you would be talked to in a way I'll just call it what it's disrespectful. You could get stopped without provocation, and it happened to me. I never had any involvement in crime or anything like that, but I was guilty by association because of the neighborhoods that I grew up in.
Yep.
Well, how do you know this person? And that was a strong hindrance that delayed my processing at LAPD, because a background investigator continually asked me questions. Well, how do you know this person? You're an associate. And I'm not. No, I'm not. He lived down the street. How am I not gonna know him? Yep. So it was those kinds of things that almost prevented me from coming onto LAPD. But the reality is, as I said, I didn't have a single encounter with a police officer between growing up in South LA and even when I was a student here at UCLA, as I was commuting, because I only lived on campus 1 year, but I commuted back to South LA. And sometimes the biggest challenge for me was my commute from Westwood to, Santa Barbara and Western, which is where I lived, and not, if I'd get stopped that week, when I got stopped that week, because my path was I'd drive down Wilshire Boulevard because my car was so beat up I couldn't get on the freeway and fall apart. So my path was I take Wilshire all the way down to Western, and I make that turn and start heading south on Western to home. And it's a dangerous place to travel, particularly at night as I'm driving through, Westwood, Beverly Hills, West LA. So
the danger on that was encounters with law enforcement. And then when you got to your own neighborhood, the dangers were the neighborhood.
The neighborhoods, because I was so familiar with it, I always felt comfortable in the neighborhood.
Okay.
I did, and maybe it was because when I was growing up in South LA, it wasn't the lines of demarcation as to whether you were affiliated or not affiliated with gangs wasn't as stringent as it later became. You had a choice back then. You could know gang members, and you could live on a block, and there was no you're going to do something for the set then. It was no, he's cool. He lives here. He may have some relatives that's caught up, but he cool. That was kind of the way it was, So I never feared, I don't care how hardcore the criminals or gang members or people in the neighborhoods, because oftentimes I knew them. Some of them were related to me. So I never really, and even as my career at LAPD, most of my career was spent in South LA, so that was always where I felt comfortable, So I didn't fear the community as much as I feared what would my next encounter with LAPD or the Sheriff's Department or Beverly Hills PD or one of those agencies was going to look like, and whether or not, because I had a tendency to sometimes, until I wised up, I'd ask questions. Well, why did you stop me? And sometimes that simple question alone was enough to get me handcuffed or sit in the back seat of the car. All those kinds of things. So.
How do you think that experience played into your policing style?
Very little tolerance. Once I became a supervisor and rose through the ranks, that I had zero patience or tolerated violating people's civil rights. It just was not. And one of the things I think, if you ask any officers that have ever worked for me, if you ever want to get on his bad side, do something like that. And here's the thing, I get some of where that comes from, but I think as a leader in a police organization, you have an obligation to weed that stuff out. And when I say weed that stuff out, over time, you have to be very mindful of the fact that officers get cynical. Black officers get cynical. All officers do. But your job as a police leader is to be mindful and look for those things. We both know when you sit down with young people or people that are coming into the profession, they're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. They can tell you all about the community, what they want to do, and how they want to save the world, and how they believe in diversity and all those things. You talk to that same person, that officer, 2 to 3 years later, and I was no exception. You start thinking, well, I've been lied to. Everybody is innocent. Nobody has done what they have been alleged to do, or you caught them doing, or it was reported to you that they did. None of that. So over time, you become very cynical, and I think that mindful leaders in police organizations have an obligation to not only acknowledge that, but also have training and put measures in place to do that. And I think the best way to do that is you have to open up your department to outside perspectives. And you also have to be willing to look and hire people from various backgrounds and for places like South LA.
Yeah.
You know.
How do you combat that cynicism that you get over time that we all experience? Because like you just said, you know, we've been lied to, and you see, I mean, in law enforcement, we really encounter the worst of the worst most of the time. People at their worst day, people acting their worst, and that's what we see day in and day out. How do you kind of combat that within your ranks?
I think the education has to be ongoing, and the education has to continually be along the lines of non-traditional, I don't even call it training, but education, because I think there's some pieces that need to be explained to officers to help them understand why is it that, you know, black people, by and large, in black communities, marginalized communities, react to the police the way they do. Why do Latino or Latinx people react the certain way to the police the way they do? And I think we don't teach enough about the history of how did we get to that? How did the black community get to where, by and large, very suspicious and non-trusting of police? That didn't happen overnight. Yep. I experienced it. I believe that too. But I think we don't do enough in educating officers as to why. Here's the history why. And the history goes back to, you know, far back as slavery and all the way up through the civil rights. When you see those signs that said white only or this, you know, back of the bus, that was the law. Mm-hmm. Who enforced that? The police. So our parents knew this coming from the South, that yes, regardless of how unfair you may think or how unequal or how biased a law was, that was what was in place. And it has been ingrained. And I don't think we teach our officers enough about this is why, you know. And once you understand this is why a community responds to you that way, you are better equipped to understand and emphasize with it. Because if you don't put anything in place, it becomes, well, they don't want me in this community anyway. I don't want to be here anyway. Yeah. This is just a job to me. They're the ones that have to live here. And all these things that I heard when I was unfortunately, but I heard from partners when I was, you know, working during the '92 civil unrest.
Oh yeah.
Those were the things that I, as someone who grew up in South LA, I listened to and heard my partners say things like, "Well, they're the ones that have to live here. Let them tear down their place." Yeah. But I think we don't do enough to teach young officers about the history of the communities that we put them in, but we also don't tell them about the trauma that those communities, the unaddressed issues and trauma that impact that community, the underperforming schools, the lack of, you know, facilities for them to even purchase, you know, healthy foods. These are the things that cause a community and the people in that community to not only respond the way they do to police, respond the way they do to each other. And I don't think we teach them enough. Is that our responsibility? Probably not. But who does it benefit? It benefits those young officers that are going out there, and we're asking them to do a very difficult job, and they're wondering, man, I came here, I'm not racist. I'm not biased. I don't have anything against, you know, you name what the people are. Mm-hmm. But over time, unchecked, where else are they going to go with that? And oftentimes we have a whole generation. My generation did a very poor job of enlightening and educating. But I think it was a product of we didn't get it. Yeah. But I think one of the solutions, and this goes back to the retention and recruitment, you got to be willing to recruit folks from those communities, and you got to put things in place to provide a clear path. And my path was not, you know, the traditional path, you know, and in a lot of ways, you know, had it not been for the intervention of one person, I'd have never got on LAPD, because my background investigator seemed hell-bent on trying to get me to say, and once I said it, I would be immediately disqualified, and that is, I'm an associate with gang members. I would just say, I know them because they lived on the street. And at one point I had to tell my background investigator, I asked a simple question. did you have a choice of where you were born and the family you were born into? And he said, no. I said, neither did I. That's where I was born. That's where I grew up. And those were my friends.
Wow.
And they still are. They still work. Yeah. But I think that we don't do a good job in teaching officers about the communities that we're putting them into prior to and all along the way while they're in there.
Yep.
And bringing in community members to be a part of those dialogues and those conversations, because once you get into these marginalized communities, they want safe streets. They're the ones that are suffering the most. And bring them in and have them a part of the dialogues. That's why one of the things I constantly throughout my, at least once I became a chief at USC, working with interventionists.
Okay.
That has been critical. I don't think we do enough of that.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier, you were talking about the 92 civil unrest and everything that came about that and why that jumped off in the first place. And then we're back here in 2020. Same issues again. A lot of it to do with policing and how marginalized communities are viewed and acted upon. What's your thoughts on where we were then, and are we any better off today?
You know what? I would say we're better off in those places that have embraced change. But you and I both cannot sit here and say that some of these little small bedroom departments in places throughout the country get it. Because not all of them do. And the reality is, do I think we're better? I think by and large, yes. I think one of the great blessings has been body-worn cameras, because for many, many years, certain segments of the population have said these things have been happening always, and now all of a sudden it's being captured on video. It's a simple question, and I wish I could say wholesale things are universally better. I think they are, but we're one incident away from something being captured on video that throws everything back to square one.
Yeah.
But I think the solution is we have to really look at and I catch some flack when I say that the standards should be somewhat nationalized. You should not be able to expect that your officers, certain things that they're not going to be familiar with at all. One of the first things I did at USC was right after George Floyd, and I do that whenever there's a controversial situation or something like that impacting all of law enforcement. I think there's lessons there, and I have the officers look at that and discuss what is expected of you. Would you have the intestinal fortitude of saying, man, get off of him? That's enough. And if he didn't, push him off. I mean, that takes a lot of guts. And you and I both know you're probably not going to be much welcomed when you go back to the station. The sad reality is, because another spin is going to be put on what really happened. But you have to be able to do that. Yeah,
I mean, easier said than done for people, of our stature and our tenure to be able to tell somebody else. But that one of those officers at the scene was a rookie. Easier said than done to be able to tell a senior officer, hey, but that's what we're required, even back then, but especially now with SB2 and duty to intercede and all that nowadays in California.
And I think we've got to get comfortable with that's just the norm.
Yep.
If you don't do that, here's what can happen. And that's what I tell officers. Do you want to be, whether you're rookie or not, now you're the poster boy or woman for bad policing or the need for reform, or once again the entire profession being labeled as institutionally racist institutions?
Yep.
And by and large, that's not the case.
Definitely not. Yeah.
But I think the answer lies in a total retooling of how we educate officers and prepare them, not just in the academy, but throughout their career. We don't focus on those things. We don't even focus enough on wellness, because one of the primary issues is someone saw that officer throughout his career. He didn't just get like that. He got comfortable with engaging in that level of misconduct. And people saw it, but at a certain point, there's a tendency to label the other parts of what he may have been doing good. Oh, he's a good cop. He's bringing in felonies. He's getting guns off the street. He's doing this, and this. Well, none of that matters anymore. The reality is the most important thing is, one, that he treats people constitutionally correct, and he doesn't violate their civil rights. Yep. And I think those are the things when I look at training where we need to go, and it has to evolve to a more holistic, because it's expected of us. We're expected now to embrace transformation, reform, and then on top of that, we're sending these young officers out to do a very difficult job that is a result of largely some broken systems, broken mental health system, broken system to deal with the unhoused population, all of those things that by virtue of us being 24/7, and when someone calls and says, hey, there's a crazy guy, in the middle of, Manchester and Normandy, and he's swinging a pipe, and he's trying to hit cars, and, he's got no clothes on, and it's 10 o'clock at night.
Yep.
And what are the officers going to do? They got to go there and they got to deal with that situation.
It's still going to be us. It's not going to be a social worker.
It's not going to be a social worker. And at the end of the day, what is going to be, once they neutralize that situation and get them into custody, what is there to transition that individual to get that individual some help? There's nothing.
Yeah.
So too much, in my opinion, has been placed on the burden of law enforcement to fix some things that we're not responsible for, but by virtue of 24/7 and what is in place.
Yep. It's been like that for a long time. Call the police whenever something's happening, whether how small it is. Hey, call the police and they'll deal with it. Just more and more stuff getting put on our plates.
It is.
Yeah.
It is, and at a certain point, society has to look at, we can't continue this way. And let's be honest. The reason those other systems are not in place to do more other than what the officers do, take the person off the street, maybe 5150 them, 72 hours, or arrest them in short term, and they're back out there doing it again within days, sometimes, within hours now. The reality is, the reason why there's nothing else to help that person on the other end is because it costs money.
Money, yep.
It costs money.
Unfortunately, that's always the root of everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So it's easier to call the police. It's easier because they can come and put a Band-Aid on it and hope for the best, but we now have a generation of officers who look at, will somebody help us? They've given us the authority to do what? And the what they're doing is cyclical. It's a revolving door. Yeah. And that's not their fault, and that's not law enforcement's fault, and that's not benefiting those marginalized communities either, because oftentimes these are their loved ones. This is somebody's nephew out there, and somebody's son, daughter, or whatever, swinging that pipe. And what happens when the officers, it's an unfortunate situation, the officer has to protect themselves or protect someone, and that person loses a life. City pays millions.
Yeah. I want to go back to, the officers out there on the street. 99% of them are doing, the right thing out there. And it's that small, minuscule amount that's out there doing the wrong thing. You talked about earlier about body cams, showing, possibly something gone awry with the police stop. But 99% of the time, those body cams are showing what the officers are doing right.
Yeah.
So that's another benefit, transparency.
Transparency, but I also think we don't do a good job of telling those stories, because by and large, officers go out, they don't want the attention. They don't. Yeah. It's like, I just did my job.
Yep.
But again, it's the larger issue is, why isn't the media picking up on it? And I know the answer to that.
Clicks.
Yeah.
Yep.
It doesn't sell. It doesn't sell. It's nobody's going to click and tune in to this officer for the last 2 months. We found out that this officer has been dipping into his or her own pocket and feeding this family because they know that they're in a bad way. I can't tell you how many times I've discovered officers doing things like that and didn't even want me as a chief to know. And then I find out and I'm like, how come nobody, said anything? Or, when, one of my good friends is this guy named Dion Joseph, and he's works Skid Row.
Oh, yeah.
And Dion,
he's been on the show.
Yeah, Dion does phenomenal work. I mean, and he's found his calling, and his passion is Skid Row. It's a job that most cops don't want to do. But, let Dion get into a quote-unquote controversial incident, or he'll be all over the news in a bad way.
Yeah.
But you and I know that guy comes to work day in, day out, wears his heart on his sleeve, and truly loves the down and out in Skid Row.
Yep.
And has helped many, many people get off the street.
Absolutely. Yep.
It's not sexy.
I started a new segment of this show called, the Black and Blue Review. Check that out. And what I do is I show body cam footage of, whether it's good or bad or what the police officers have done. But I've shown that to, the segment with regular citizens out on the street. So if it's just you and I talking about it and we agree what the cops did is right, of course the viewers are going to say, of course they agree with them. It's two cops. But if it's me as the police officer and you as the plumber, and we both agree what the officer did was correct, or me as the police officer and you as the teacher both agree, now it's a different story.
Yeah.
Because of the body cam footage.
Because of And here's the thing, body cam footage, it's been a plus, and but at the same time, I can't think of any way that it's been negative. But at the same time, it's like we're saying, 99.5% of that footage is good, honest police work. Officers going out doing what the community expects of them, doing what their cities, doing what their departments expect of them. And that 1% is what makes the news.
Facts.
And again, that is what it is. But the reality is, at a certain point, if we're going to ever get to a place where the community is truly engaged with the departments in a way that's meaningful, that has to change, because in the end, we're only as good as the community is willing to work with us. And right now, we're at an inflection point because you got a large segment that don't trust the police, don't understand what we do, and those encounters and those peering back the curtains to look at, this is what police work is all about. It's kind of like when you send the media or community members and you put them in those FOT simulators where they have to make a split level decision, shoot, don't shoot situation. It becomes crystal clear. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people, including people in the media, said, I had no idea that things happen that fast. And the reality is, you don't have a whole bunch of time to make that split level decision. And that split level decision, you got to get right most of the time.
Yeah.
And but those are the things that I think we need to demystify, and we need to bring more of the public into our realm and to our world to understand what we have to contend with.
And how do we do that if the media doesn't want to do it?
If the media doesn't want to do it. But I think part of it is, if the media doesn't want to do it, legislators need to at least do it. But again, there's so many false narratives about what the truth is and what police do and what police don't do and what police are responsible for as far as social ills and all of that stuff that we're not. The reality is, they've got to do a better job too, elected officials in supporting, because one of the things that, I think when I'm dealing with young people, and they have their perceptions of the police, and a lot of their perceptions was based upon not even having encounters with the police. At least I had encounters with them. I had a reason to not like the police, and most of my friends had a very valid reason to not. But many of them, they've never had a contact with the police, but they have taken pretty extreme positions when it comes to the need for law enforcement, not the validity of what they do, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. Many just think we don't even need cops. And the reality is, if you live in one of those communities like South LA and East LA, yeah, you do need the police. And those community members will tell you, we want our officers, and we want our officers, we want to know them. They're not asking for much.
Yep, yep. Do you find the population here, because UCLA is cream of the crop of the UC schools, this in Berkeley, right? Mm-hmm. And USC is another premier institution. The clientele here, the student body here is maybe a little different than, say, Cal State LA or Cal State Fullerton, and maybe those attitudes towards police are a little different?
I think you got to look at it from a generational standpoint.
Okay.
Gen Z, Gen X. I think they all look at it from the same lens, and because again, I think social media has played a huge impact on all of those perceptions. And I think George Floyd and COVID, all those factors have played into kind of a universal perception of the police and the devaluing of what we do and who we are. I think it has been more universal than that. So I think that if you were to even, talk to students at Cal State LA or Northridge, you would probably hear the same things you hear at a USC and a UCLA. I think, I'm pretty sure you would.
Okay.
Because I think, that's the downside of social media is so many have subscribed to some things that are, as I've been in this profession now, almost going on 20 years, campus, is some things that I see that are a little bit more disturbing than when I was a student.
Right.
There was no cancel culture when I was a student. When I was a student and my friends that were from various backgrounds that were different from mine, mind you, when I grew up in South LA, I never sat in a class from kindergarten to graduating at Crenshaw High School. I never sat in a class with a person that wasn't either largely, probably vast majority black and maybe a few, Latino people. That was my reality. Then I get here and it's a melting pot. And my friends and the people that I associated with were from various backgrounds. My roommate, was Chinese. So the reality is, when we had these conversations and they were addressing stereotypes and I was talking to them and I'm pushing past stereotypes that I had about their cultures, nobody got offended. Today there's a cancel culture that if you didn't know, you should have known.
Yeah.
You're done.
I think, college is supposed to be that place where you learn these certain things. If you grew up in only, a black or brown neighborhood and you come here to a place like UCLA and you get to interact with different people.
And that's what it did
races,
for me.
Different cultures, different all that. Yeah.
That's what it did for me. But now I think, and largely because of social media, people get canceled out all the time. If there's a level of, and I don't think many of them will even admit it, there's a level of intolerance that at least I didn't have to experience as a college student. There was nothing, when they asked me things about South LA, like was I in a gang? Yeah, I could have gotten offended, but I also said some things that probably was pretty offensive and biased when I asked them. And I didn't take it as offense because if I knew by talking to them that largely they had no interactions with people like me. And what they saw was based upon stereotypes that were in the media. And then once they got to know me, and even when I was on LAPD, and people, that were from places different from South LA on the department, and I explained my situation and, my contacts with the police and they'd be like, JT, how could anybody not like you? You're a good guy. I'm like, yeah, but look, They didn't see that. They didn't take the time to get to know you. So at the end of the day, and one of the things it was always amazing to me on LAPD, I did a lot of writing and research on the history of black officers on LAPD. I discovered the first black officer killed in the line of duty wasn't Oscar Joe Bryant in the 60s, but was Charles P. Williams in 1923. So I'd done a lot of research, and I would write, and I'd write these articles that got published about the history of early black LAPD. And the reality is, in my mind, I thought I was writing it for black officers because I felt they would be most beneficial and embrace it. Wasn't the case. The white officers loved it. To this day, I get, hey, JT, when are you going to write another article about blacks on LAPD? From white officers. So I can't say that it was people are not accepting. And when you read my stuff, it's not, I don't soft sell any of it. Yeah, I talk about, LAPD, didn't break down its racial segregation until long after the military did. That black officers, the reason Newton Division became where all the black officers worked was because the white officers didn't want to work in the black community. I didn't soft sell any of the stuff that I wrote about, but it was embraced by white officers. And I would tell you, there was times where some black officers challenged the validity of, I had a black officer say, your research can't be true because LAPD didn't have any black officers in the 20s. And I'm like, well, LAPD hired a black officer in 1889. So it's not when I look back and think about things that people tend to have false perceptions of and beliefs about race, sometimes it goes out the window, because there are other people outside of your race that may be more accepting of pieces of your history and your story and your background, and even, like I said, I'd have oftentimes, white officers say, JT, I almost would apologize. I'm sorry you had to go through that growing up in South LA. I'm like, dude, that had nothing to do with you. that had nothing to do, and I'm over it. I can't, we, as black people, we can't go on and be, productive if we hold those kinds of grudges, so.
Nice. So, Chief, what's your most rewarding part of your job as chief here at UCLA?
The potential impact that I can have on the next generation of officers. When I meet and I talk to young officers that are just starting their career, I get excited because I get to ask them, of all the things that you could do, why did you choose police work? And why did you choose here? And one of the things I'm finding out, and I do that with every single person that come into this organization. I did it every single person that came into organization at USC, because I want to see what's motivating. So I'm encouraged, and I think that's what excites me about continuing even in my 40th year, is the impact that I can possibly have. And I actually can tell my story, and there was a time where when I told my story, it didn't resonate. When I tell growing up in South LA and coming here to UCLA and, the transformation that being in a diverse environment, being, single mother, 6 kids, raised on welfare, and, coming here and didn't even have luggage, and my stuff was, I waited till other kids moved into the dorms because my stuff was in hefty bags, because, but it's stuff like that. And then to now sit here and be the chief of police here at UCLA, I mean, life is strange. And even USC, I grew up around USC and coming up on that campus, so I think what encourages me more than anything is being in a position to have an impact on where the profession goes.
Yes.
And one of the things I think, and what attracts me to being in a university environment, is the reality is you're around some of the best and brightest minds. And I always tell people, law enforcement is not going to solve the issues that we're confronted with by themselves. These are issues that impact society. And where else can that best be tackled than on a university?
Thanks.
Because these are issues that deal with mental health, homelessness, substance abuse, community trauma. At the end of the day, South LA and the communities like South LA, they didn't get like that overnight, and they're not going to be solved by the police. Yet they will be the first to tell you, those community members, we need the police. You know, if you know, we want to see more police. Because until things are, stabilized to the point where I can feel safe going out, or I can send my kids without having to worry about this and that and this and that. The reality is, we're not going anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're not.
Absolutely. And on the flip side of that, what's a more challenging part of your job as a chief?
Man, jeez, that's a good question because it depends on the day. It really
Right?
does.
It's Monday. It's Monday.
It's Monday because we went through a period, and we're still in it where at any given day, we've had some protests here or demonstrations here that almost 1,000 people on campus, and making sure that both sides can express, have their First Amendment, voices. And then safeguarding everybody else. So it depends on, and who saw this the beginning of last year? Nobody did. Who saw the pandemic? Nobody did. Who saw George Floyd? And just like any other part of law enforcement, the biggest challenge may not have occurred, because I can talk about some of the ones that have occurred, but as you know, in policing, we got to grind through it. We got to grind through it. The job doesn't change. We still got to keep people safe. But it's the curveballs that come your way that, man, it's like, where did that come from?
Yeah.
And how do I deal with it? And that's where you have, your network of mentors, because no chief does their job alone, not a smart chief. I have a network of campus chiefs that I can pick up the phone and call, hey, have you ever dealt with this? I have municipal mentors and chiefs and friends and various levels, from officer level all the way up. Hey, what is this about? Nobody does this job alone. I think more so in law enforcement, we're connected to others in our profession, and we're not bound by geography, because something could break off in, Maine that nobody has seen before nationally.
Affects us out here in Cali. Yep.
Yeah,
No
yeah,
doubt.
and in campus, I think the worst thing that any of us dread more than anything, active shooter. If you ask me what keeps me up at night, active shooters.
Yeah, there was one here a couple years ago. No.
Probably about 5 or 6 years, 6, 7 years ago.
I didn't think it was that long ago, but I remember.
It was a while. A professor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
But we had USC. We had a student. He didn't use a gun, but he stabbed and killed a professor.
Yeah.
It just, and one of the things, just like, if it hasn't happened on your campus yet, just the only reason is because it hasn't happened at your campus yet.
Not a question of if, but when, right?
When, and you better be prepared for it. So I think probably the better question is, what keeps me up at night in the campus safety realm? And I would have to say active shooter.
Okay.
And officers are going to respond and do what they do. It's just a matter of, because every active shooter incident that occurs, not just on a college campus, anywhere, there's lessons learned, and the shooters are evolving more. There are things that we used to do 15 years ago and 10 years ago that, based upon what we've learned since, that we no longer can subscribe to that tactic anymore.
Yeah, like waiting around for more officers before you enter.
Yep. Tending to those that have been shot. If the shooter still has not been neutralized,
Step over them. Yep.
Step over them.
Yep.
And that was not always the case.
Yeah, just looking at the two different incidents from Valdy, where they didn't enter, and then the one in, what was that, Memphis or Nashville?
Yeah.
Where they went in and they took out that threat right away.
Yep.
You can see the two differences there.
No, and those are the things that, you train, and you hammer home, you dissect other incidents that, you're constantly having to deal with those.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
and the thing about being in campus as long as I had, there's not a whole bunch, knock on wood, that have not seen. I think the worst is, and I think any chief will tell you, is losing an officer in the line of duty. And shortly after becoming chief at USC, Keith Lawrence, and in a national way, Dorner's first victims
Yes.
were Monica and Keith. And Keith was an officer in my department.
Yeah, and he came through my city and went up to Big Bear, and a bunch of people in my department were up in there.
Oh, yeah.
My who's now deputy chief was my sergeant at the time in NARCS, and we all rolled up there, and he was next to the deputy that got shot by Dorner.
Oh, really?
Up there at Big Bear. So
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah, so
So it affected all of us.
it affected all of us, and just don't get me started on the protective details that had to be city everywhere. So I think if you ask me what is the absolute worst situation that I've had to deal with, was that, because to lose an officer in the line of duty and the way it happened. And then at the time, not even knowing until a couple of days later that this was what it was. The reality is that, until you've had to give a flag to a family of a fallen officer, to me, that's the worst. That to me is the absolute worst, because, you recruited an individual, you brought him in, and the reality is you want to make sure, as best you can, as the chief, you're doing all you can to return that person back home to their families. And through that, one of my best friends became, Keith's father, Kevin, who we're still in contact with, and his mother, Venus. So, it's things like that, that when I think about an officer like Keith, whose career was cut down, and he was the embodiment of everything I looked for in an officer. And then I owe it to him to continue, to try to create more. His career may have been cut down, but the things I learned through him and the qualities that I saw in him, I can help, breed that in other officers. Because one of the things I remember a conversation, I was having with, it might have been with his dad, and I was thinking, if Dorner had known Keith, there's no way they would not have empathized with each other. There was a lot of, he was a kind of person you couldn't help but connect on some level in a good way.
Yeah.
And he came into law enforcement for all of the right reasons. One, to make a difference. Went to one agency, didn't feel like he fit there because, he didn't like some of the ways he felt they treated, marginalized people, and decided campus is more his speed. And I wound up recruiting him, and I was like, man, if I could just clone this kid. And then I get the call, and everything changed.
Wow.
Everything.
Wow. Yeah, that was a terrible time.
It really was.
Yeah.
It really was.
So as we wrap this up real quick, I didn't even ask you about the demographics of the PD here. How large is it? What's the diversity like in your department? Does it kind of mirror the campus community?
It's a smaller department than I had at USC. USC, I had a combination of armed officers and unarmed officers. It was about 325 officers that just were responsible. Here, 65 sworn officers, and we're branching out and building unarmed officers. Contingency, I would say we're underdeployed. We're probably down about 10 officers, so we're probably at about 45, 55 or somewhere in there.
Kind of like everywhere, right?
Everywhere.
Everywhere is short.
We are hiring. considering UCLA, UCPD, it's a good department, and I would encourage folks, don't just look at the municipal agencies. University policing is, if you're looking for challenges, definitely look into it. But as far as the diversity, I would say we're very diverse. I would say, I couldn't give you the exact breakdown, but I would probably dare say the majority of our officers are probably Latino, followed by African American, and then white.
Oh, wow. Okay.
We probably got about 22%. I think we're at 22% women. But we're my philosophy is, you have to be intentional about diversity. You can't leave it to chance. And my recruiters, before I got here, that's the way they looked at how to improve and make the department better, is by, making it as diverse as possible. Because the university population, student population, is very diverse, as you know.
Very diverse. Very diverse. Yep.
So we can always do better. As long as I'm here, and we're always going to be, subscribe to be as diverse as possible. I think at USC, similarly, I think one of the things was I recruited a lot from the local community around USC.
Okay.
And I think one of the things that I think is going to be the biggest change and transition challenge for me is USC, I was from that community. I knew that community. Here, it's been such a long time since I was a part of this community, and I commuted back and forth to this community, and I don't have the demographics around here.
Because here you're surrounded by Bel Air and Beverly Hills. I don't know how many people from those communities really want to be cops from.
No, and that's the thing. One of the things I did at USC was we had a cadet post. So we basically would take young people, like the Explorer program, and take them and, give them, put them through the cadet academy, and they wore the uniform and they volunteered. But the other thing we did was, I made it the priority being college education, that my goal was not to transform them into police officers. My goal was to put them on the path to be first generation college students. And, over the my time as chief, every single one of those kids that graduated from high school went on to colleges. And one of the great things about it, when I got here, 2 of my cadets from USC, one graduated last year, and the other one, he's in his senior year, but they credit that program for them even coming to UCLA. So,
That's awesome.
Those type of opportunities, I hope I find a way to do that. Even if I got to bring kids from East LA and South LA over here, but the reality is, there's, I got to find a way to address the youth issues in our community through UCLA.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And lastly, before I get you out of here, Chief, what about some words of advice or wisdom for aspiring or police officers just now getting into the profession?
I would say, one, it is a great career. I would not have been in it for the last 40 years if I didn't. Be true to yourself, where you came from, and be mindful of the fact that don't let this job change you. Be a change agent within your department to the degree that you can, and position yourself to make a difference in those departments. That may be working an assignment where you have more interaction with the community. That may be working an assignment where you can have an impact on recruitment. Or it may just be, working in patrol. However, building relationships with the community that benefit your department. Wherever you're at, have an impact and be mindful of where this profession needs to go, and that that it's up to the individual officers to help us get there. because we're at an inflection point. It's not going to stay the way it's been for the last, how many years it's been. We're being asked by the community and demanded. Either we can be a part of that transition and help educate and guide the community as to what is in everyone's mutual best interest, or we can just let things continue to go the way they are, where we're continuing to hear things like defund, abolish, which we know are not in anybody's best interest.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Be an active participant in your career, and like me, I never envisioned being a chief. I really did. If we had more time, I could tell you how I tried to talk my way out of being the chief at USC, but they saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And even here, I was intending to come and do the interim chief for a year and go back into retirement, and then I realized, this has reignited my passion for, the career, the profession, and it has allowed me the opportunity to speak to another generation of officers in a way that I think is important.
Yep. I think you said it best right there, passion for the career.
It is. It really is, because if you don't enjoy this, and I've enjoyed it, it's been a great career for me. Why do it? And I always will check with my officers that are in training and young in their career, and I'll ask them, are you still having fun? Because this is a fun job. There's no other job, I think, that will give you the opportunity every single day you put that uniform on to make a difference, to help somebody, and leave a positive impression with one person. I wished growing up in South LA that an officer, somebody would have said, you know what, kid, I value the fact that you're trying to get an education, or, hey, when I see you, or just explain to me why I was stopped in a respectful manner, it would have made a world of difference. And that's why I tell officers, when you see young people, acknowledge them, talk to them, because oftentimes you may be the only person they ever talk to. And a real quick story, I was at a community conference. It was a grassroots conference, and it's put on at USC, but it's truly grassroots. I mean, you're talking about people that just got out of incarceration a couple of that week, and they're there at the conference. It's really grassroots, and I was sitting at a table talking to some young people, and one young Hispanic guy just got out of incarceration, and we were talking, and I wasn't in uniform, and he didn't know I was a cop, and then he later went up to somebody and they told him, that was the chief of USC you were talking to. He's like, really? And the guy later came up to me. He says, man, I've never had a conversation with a police officer like that. And it made a difference. And I was just talking to him, sharing my experiences, and not from an authoritarian position, but yeah, I can relate to that. Yeah, I can relate to that.
Yep.
Yeah, I know people. I've had relatives that are incarcerated and things like that. So we connected in a human level where there wasn't the chief and I'm a guy just got out of incarceration. And I never forget, he came up to me and he was just flabbergasted and surprised. And I said, I put my pants on one leg at a time like you. Yeah, I said, it was the grace of God that I made it out. I said, the reality is you continue to do the things that you're doing, and there's no end to what you can do. And I think those kinds of conversations and those kinds of interactions can only happen if we initiate them. I mean, when we're like this, when in the uniform, yes, there's some barriers, but at the same time, eventually people have to get to the point where they look at even this and say, yeah, I know him. He's, he's a Dodger fan, or he's this and he's that.
Yeah.
And, so.
Or a Niner fan.
Or Niner fan.
All right, Chief. Hey, I appreciate you.
Oh, no worries.
Great conversation.
Great conversation. Thank you for
UCLA
having
Police Chief John Thomas, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you
Thanks,
again
Chief.
for having me.
got it.
And keep up the good work with the podcast.
I will. Thanks, Chief.